What would you say the oldest fan fiction is? Would you say it was Twilight in 2007? Or the opening of fanfiction.net in 1998? Or the Star Trek fanzines of 1967? Or the unofficial sequel to Don Quixote in 1614? Or would you say that it's everything Plato wrote about Socrates after February 15th, 399 BC, after the death of Socrates? I'm not sure yet, but there's one thing we can all agree on. The newest fanfiction is Phoenix Fat Adventures. Zootopia fanfiction is the newest one as of writing this. Using these examples and tracing fanfiction up to the present day, that gives us, at the very least, 2,423 years to cover in this video. To find the oldest fanfiction, we should focus on the modern history for a strong basis in which to judge older works. We should start by defining what it is. What is fan fiction? The Google definition reads as such, quote, fiction written by a fan of and featuring characters from a particular TV series, movie, etc. And this covers a lot of bases. Some people add in the amateur capacity to the definition, and it originally did mean that. But in the modern context, I don't really think it needs to or should be considered in that definition. There's some terms you're going to want to know going into this, and as somebody with their PhD in fanficology, I'm going to fill you in. The first term you're going to want to know is a term called canon. It's derived from the Greek word canon, which means to rule. It's basically just the actual events that happened inside a fictitious universe, such as me dressing up as a 50s noir detective for this video. That is canon to this video. The next term you're going to want to know is a headcanon. Headcanon is just your own personal beliefs and interpretations on events that happened or may not have happened in the show. Such as, I believe that Steve from Minecraft is a bottom, and I will not elaborate further. The next term and last term you're going to want to know is what a fanon is. It's kind of like a fan canon, essentially. So basically, it is just a fan-wide headcanon, something that basically the entire community agrees on, or at least the majority of them agree on. We need to talk about the elephant in the room. Why aren't pesky copyright laws stopping me from writing Bender X Aunt Fanny crossover het OTP canon divergent AU DDDNE darkfic? We'll quickly cover the history of copyright. In 1710, the Statute of Anne came around. It's the first modern version of copyright. Basically, you'd have 14 years to sell your book or work, and then it would enter the public domain. However, the terms for a direct copy of it were really fucking flimsy. If you wrote a book, let's say you read a book, it's fucking awesome, and then I come around and I write a sequel to your book using all of your characters, I even copy plot points, I'm totally in the clear. Unless it's a complete, like, word for word copy, you cannot sue me for it. But then later, in 1886, the Berne Convention was established, granting authors the right to control how their works are used and by whom. After a certain number of years, it would actually enter the public domain. But now, a larger, however, Disney was making bangers, and they didn't want the ooey gooey public to have their hands on any of it. So they did what corporations do when they want their way. Lobby. In 1998, the Sonny Bono Copyright Terms Extension Act came into effect. It extended copyright to the life of the author plus 70 years, or for corporations, 120 years after the creation, or 95-ish years after the publication of it. But, as fans do, nothing can stop them. So they scrubbed over all these copyright laws and they noticed two things. Either one, don't make money off of it yourself, so you're not taking money away from the people that made it. Or two, make sure the author doesn't give a shit. Those are your two options. This lenience gave us what I would like to consider pre-fic. Gulliver's Travels was released on October 28th, 1726. People began writing about Gulliver in new situations or some that were just vaguely brought up in the book. Hundreds more fan works followed. Alexander Pope wrote poems where Gulliver's wife, who was barely mentioned in the original, complains that he is never home to have sex with her. When Gulliver returned from his final adventure, he is so disgusted by the human race that he hides from his family. Mary Gulliver, his wife, was understandably not having it with her husband's newfound abstinence. Most of the earliest novels were epistolary, meaning they were composed of letters, and not directly published in like a book format per se. A few hundred years later, in 1893, Arthur Conan Doyle released The Final Problem, the last book in the series for Sherlock Holmes, in which, spoilers, Sherlock Holmes fucking dies. Audiences and fans were shocked, appalled, and so upset they were mailing him death threats to his front door. That is how upset they were. And we've all been in this fan position. A character dies, something happens, and you're like, this fucking ruined the series. So you need to take it upon yourself to fix it. Let me introduce Fix It Fic, where the fans take the civic duty of saving a character or fixing a story into their own hands. So we got tons of unauthorized works about Sherlock Holmes. We have fan fictions dating as far back as 1897, which are among the earliest non-negotiables of these are fucking fan fiction. There may be older works, but those are up for debate, and I'll discuss them way at the back half of this video. So back to copyright, there's a reason I was talking about it. There are two ways we can write our Sherlock Holmes Fix-It Fics. Number one, we don't make money off of it. Or number two, the author doesn't give a shit. And lucky for us, Doyle killed off Sherlock Holmes because he felt tied down and he didn't want to write about the character anymore, meaning we got an in. This isn't the first instance of fan works like this. There have been unauthorized stories and sequels for years. Shit, as long as there have been stories. Stories such as A New Alice in the Old Wonderland by Anna M. Richard, based on Alice in Wonderland. Or in 1614, the sequel to Don Quixote, written before the actual author could finish his second book for it.
So I fucked up. My audio broke. You hear a high ringing sound. You could probably hear it in the bit right before this. But I'm just going to re-record it. In the late 20th century, printing became cheap and accessible, leading to the invention of the fanzine. Fanzines are just magazines made by fans for whatever you'd like them to be about. I have a couple hardcore and punk fanzines. It might shake. Word. This is set up on top of my cat's carrier thing, and now he's in it right now, so he's helping. Some of the earliest fanzines were based on the works of Jane Austen. A lot of early literary fans calling themselves Janites or Janeites. I'm going to call them Janites because I think that sounds better, but it's probably Janeites. I'm not sure. That was the one thing I forgot to actually look up before filming this. A novel called, quote, Old Friends and New Fancies, an imaginary sequel to the novels of Jane Austen by Sybil Brinton, was published in 1913. And it was one of the first works of Jane Austen fan fiction. And these are what are known as continuation fics, where you take it onto yourself to write a continuation of whatever story ended. So let's say I didn't want Lord of the Rings to end. I'm going to write 16 more chapters about the horse from chapter 4 or whatever when they rode. I don't know. If anybody else has read Lord of the Rings and knows exactly what I'm talking about with the whole chapter where they kind of just focus on the horse, let me know. Because I feel like I read this in middle school and it's like a fever dream for me. So if I'm right with that, please let me know. Because I feel like I'm insane whenever I talk about the horse chapter. There are currently over 200,000 works in the JAF Index, otherwise known as the Jane Austen Fanfic Index. That's a lot. And Goodreads has hundreds of works that are labeled as Jane Austen fan fiction. Let's talk about when the term fan fiction actually came around. So it initially came up in 1938, referring to the difference between pro-written sci-fi novels and amateur written ones. So there were a lot of people writing works based on H.G. Wells, Sherlock Holmes, all of those. And those were called fan fiction because they were fiction written by fans and they weren't professionals writing these things, okay? In 1952, a novel called, quote, The Enchanted Duplicator by Walt Willis and Bob Shaw was a metafiction work. It was basically a piece of fan fiction about fans. And this work was really important for one reason, and I'm going to give you that quote now. Now the songs of the trumpets filled the air, ringing across the true fandom to the far mountains. I'll let you take a guess why that line's important. Oh, it's the first time the word fandom was ever used ever. That's pretty important. Then in the 1950s, with TV becoming more popular, a lot of people were introduced to fiction, and a lot of people were introduced to writing it in turn. And no series or anything in the entire history of fan fiction has had a bigger impact than Star Trek. Okay, guys? If you walk away with this, knowing anything about this, is that like, if you were to ask like anybody who's like somewhat knowledgeable in the history of fan fiction, they'll tell you it started with Star Trek. In 1968, a Star Trek fanzine called Spockanalia came out, which had a collection of a bunch of fan fiction written by fans. Kind of redundant. But it had a bunch of fan fiction in it. And that's one of the first places people really saw fan fiction start coming into being. They would see them at fanzines, written and dispersed at like conventions. So you go to a convention, you could go buy these fanzines, and you could get your fan fiction before AO3 was a thing. You would go here and you would get your fan fiction at a convention, paperback fan fiction. The majority of fan fiction writers at this time were female, and by 1973, a whopping 90% of them were female. So you know what that means. We can talk about men kissing men. The Ring of Saturn by Jennifer Guttridge came out in 1968, and it is a Kirk/Spock smut fan fiction. And don't worry, guys, I read this, and here's what I wrote about it. They find themselves stranded on a remote, deserted planet. Spock goes into a state of, quote, Ponfar, the violent on-heat fever that comes to Vulcans, during which they must, quote, have sex or die. To save Spock's life, Kirk allows Spock to have sex with him, and then the two fall in love and, quote, spending all their remaining days on the planet exploring both the planet and each other's bodies. And this fanfiction is possibly the first use of the term slash in fanfiction to ever be used. So all your slash fanfiction, you gotta thank Star Trek for that. So after the Ring of Saturn came out, there was a lot of it being shared around online, which is kind of to the detriment of Jennifer, okay? Because what happened is she never meant for like more than just her friends to see this. So what happened is this little fan fiction she wrote about guys kissing guys was all of a sudden all over the internet, and everybody was reading it. In 1987, Jennifer's work was published in a fanzine called Alien Brothers, a 274-page, how many was it? 36 fan fiction long fanzine that was just Kirk/Spock smut. Several of these were not given permission to be used in this fanzine. And that's just what we know of. God knows if they got any permission at all to do this. And actually, let me tell you this. So this actually led me down a rabbit hole. So AO3 runs basically a wiki just for the history of fanfiction, and they're fucking awesome. There is the lady who published this book actually was like infamous in the Star Trek like fandom at the time, because she was just like batshit insane and like not a good person, and was like known for stealing people's work all the fucking time, and like it was bad. So go check. I will leave links for all of the like works I used to figure out this video. They'll be in the description. But I'll also leave like the fun links so you can go find out more than I even found out. Like there's a lot I cut out of this video because of how much history there really is, and how dedicated AO3 and their parent company, the organization of Transformative Works, are for keeping track of this shit. It's insane. But really quick, I want to point out that fanfiction isn't always sexual. It doesn't need to be. I know I've talked about a lot of smut and sexy fun times for fan fiction, but that's not always the case. Even one of the most prominent types of fan fiction is just crossover, and there's nothing inherently sexual or anything about that. It's just people want to write. I don't know, man. It happens. It's kind of like a Rule 34 thing where if it exists, there will be porn of it. And fan fiction's kind of like, I would say, the easiest to get into. Like, for me to go draw Kirk/Spock, I think that takes a little more work than me writing in way too much detail what Kirk and Spock did. So I think that's kind of why you see a lot of, like, that in fan fiction. But just, it's not all that. I just want to make that really clear. It's not all like that. Many of the early fan fictions were mimeographed, which means that they were just kind of passed around on paper. They weren't like digitally anywhere. They were written down, handed out at conventions. If you were on a mailing list, you would get it mailed to you, which is kind of fucking crazy, because who's out here? Somebody's got to mail me Kirk smut. That's a crazy thing to think about. And in the 1990s, we experienced either the best or worst thing to ever happen, all depending on who you ask. A lot of early fanfic writers, I mean, not everybody was writers, but somebody who's actually in the community, what do I call you guys? Fanfic consumers and producers. They utilized a lot of community sites like AOL, CompuServe, and Usenet. Websites like that so they could put up their stuff, people could read them. It was awesome. But in 1998, a little thing called Fanfiction.net came out, and it was the biggest change in fanfiction until this point. For somebody to be able to write something, if I wanted to write my fanfiction and I put it out to the world, there's only so many copies of it. Let's say I wrote a fan fiction about how much I would do things to the limited edition Dr. Pepper mascot outfit from Skate 3, and I only gave it to like 3 friends, and they eventually all were like, this is really fucking weird, and they tossed it out. My entire work is gone forever. But if I take that and I put it on fanfiction.net, and it gets pushed out to a central server so that way it's held there, and anybody can read it at any time, it means I can make you guys know the unbelievable things I would do for years to come. It's a huge thing. Even outside of that silly example, it's a huge thing to be able to have recorded history of everything that's happened. Like, that's been a huge thing with games going on right now, that nobody's like preserving games. Preservation of human history, no matter how fucking weird what we humans do is very important, and I will never shut the fuck up about it. Preserve everything as much as you can. It's all we have. But early on, a lot of fanfic.net was paid for. It also allowed comments, as I mentioned earlier, comments, reviews, updates for whenever things came around. So it started to build like an actual community of fan fiction outside of just like their actual fandoms. So instead of it just being like, there's this fandom for Undertale and this fandom for Star Trek or whatever the fuck. Undertale didn't exist at that time, but shut the fuck up. Just, they were all united under the one roof of fanfiction.net. In the early 2000s, fanfiction.net swapped from a paid model to a free-to-use model with ads. And that was really big because now anybody could join, get in on the actual community. You weren't paywalled out of this community of fanfiction writers. You could just do it for free, meaning that new people were joining almost daily. This was a massive spike in how many people were reading and writing fanfiction. There was only, I think, one time when there was more growth to it, and we will get to that. However, though, with the growth, they decided to, quote, remove explicit content. And if you've ever read fan fiction, people were not happy about their Kirk/Spock Hurt/Comfort fanfiction getting removed. And with people really upset about that, even though it like just got really big like a year before that. After that, people moved to sites like GeoCities, LiveJournal, MySpace. People moved to these blogging sites because it gave people another avenue in which to get into fanfiction outside of like going to conventions and getting fanzines with collections of them, or if you went to like just any convention, joined a mailing list to get them sent to you, whatever you did. This was another avenue to do it because you got all the features that you would get on like fanfiction.net, like commenting, email updates about when it gets updated, so you can be like, holy shit, they just updated this, and you go straight to the website. It gave you an option to do that. A lot of these sites remained popular for years. GeoCities was eventually closed. LiveJournal people still use for fanfiction to this day. And I don't think I need to talk about MySpace. But you may wonder what kind of fanfictions were popular in the 90s and even today. So here's a quick little list of the popular ones. Types of fanfiction. AU. AU just means an alternative universe. So basically anything about this series, change something about it, and go from there. So it's like, let's say, I'm just going to go back to Lord of the Rings because it's easy and I know a little bit about it. So let's say I write a fan fiction and it's about Lord of the Rings, and I make Frodo a dwarf instead of a hobbit. There's a lot of subcategories to AU as well, such as like soulmate AUs, where like soulmates are a real thing. Sometimes it's the classic, they have the fucking strings that connect people, whatever the fuck. But that's a common one. There's also time travel AUs, where like time travel is just a thing. Like there's a lot that go into it. ABO. It stands for Alpha, Beta, and Omega. And to be honest, I'm not sure how I can explain this without this video getting taken down. So I'm gonna leave a link in the description to a video I think explains it well, because I don't want to like copy them word for word. But you can, down in the description, I'll have a video that explains it, but I don't know how I'm gonna do it. Okay, back to the silly 50s noir detective.
Canon adherence fic. So basically it's just any fan fiction. It could be in any genre, but this is like a subcategory-ish, but it's something people do a lot. It's a fan fiction where everything follows as close as they can to the original canon. And this tends to live more on a gradient than it is like you either follow it or you don't. So sometimes they still have like fan ships in them, or like, you know, anything. Just a lot of the main story beats have to be the same. Dark fic. Stories that are more depressing and darker than the original ones, often done in contrast. So it's basically like if I take, let's say, Bluey, and the dad's actually a murderer and he records snuff films for a living. That's a dark fic. But also, not all stories tagged as dark are considered dark fic. Adding on to dark fic, this is kind of like a subcategory, kind of like just addition to it, is something called Dead Dove Do Not Eat, often called DDDNE. It's a subcategory of dark fic. It began as an AO3 tag in 2015, intended to warn people that the stories contain dark themes without explicitly condemning them. Because the dark themes were tagged specifically in it, it would be like DDDNE and then whatever it was behind it. It served to reinforce a reader's attention to it. So it was an important thing for the story that they kind of wanted you to focus on. So it served as a way to reinforce that. Crossover fanfiction. We touched on this a little bit, but it's just characters from different series or universes sharing the same one. Fix-It fic. We kind of touched on this with Sherlock Holmes, but it's basically there was something you thought was really bad about the series. You wrote your own fanfiction to fix that from being an issue. So basically bring back somebody from the dead. That's the most common thing they use it for, is somebody died and they're like, that was stupid, so they bring him back. Fluff or WAF, or WAFF. I never actually looked into how to say that. If you read fan fiction, tell me. Their story is designed to be lighthearted and romantic, or called a WAFF, which is short for warm and fuzzy feelings. This next one has one of my favorite terms I've ever came across in my entire life. Hurt/comfort. Stories in which a character is put through a traumatic experience so they can be comforted. Or alternatively, a wump, which focuses on the character suffering without comfort. Basically, you just watch this character struggle. Yes. Excessive wump can also be considered dark fic. So the next and last fanfiction type we're going to talk about is self-insert. Isekai. So now we're going to talk about what you've all been waiting for. No, not Wattpad. We're getting to that. We're going to be talking about the 9/11 to 50 Shades of Grey pipeline. Let me explain. On 9/11, a man named Gerard Way witnesses the terrorist attacks at the Twin Towers. And needing a way to deal with all of these emotions coming in, he formed an emo band called My Chemical Romance. And even one of the first songs he wrote for the band was a song called Skylines and Turnstiles, which is about the 9/11 terrorist attacks. And they took off, becoming one of the biggest emo bands of all time. Move forward a few years, and we get a girl in 2006 who cited famous last words by My Chemical Romance is the biggest inspiration for everybody's favorite werewolf, Jacob Black. That's right. Without MCR, we would not get Twilight. Stephanie Meyer even lists MCR as the biggest influence on the book. And really quick fun fact, they actually reached out to My Chemical Romance to write a song for the movies for Twilight, and they laughed at them. I just thought that was funny. But they got Paramore on the soundtrack, and that shit's goated. But then 3 years later, a fan fiction gets posted to fanfiction.net called Master of the Universe. And it's about Bella Swan starting an intense, steamy relationship with billionaire CEO Edward Cullen. And if you know what I'm leading to, it's fucking 50 Shades of Grey. It was originally fan fiction about Twilight, that they changed the characters in it so it wasn't copyright and published it. It's Twilight. Although the author, E.L. James, then attempted to erase evidence that it was ever a fan fiction, it's clear 50 Shades of Grey is actually AU het / Twilight fanfiction. Let me break that down. Alternative universe. Edward Cullen's a billionaire CEO. Het, meaning it's heterosexual. / Bella, Edward, / they fucking. Twilight. It's Twilight, and it's a fanfiction. Back to normal stuff. In 2008, the organization of Transformative Works was incorporated as a non-profit. Nobody can argue with me on this. It is the most important and best thing that has ever happened to fan fiction ever. Period. The Organization of Transformative Works, or the OTW, is a non-profit organization established by fans to serve the interests of fans by providing access and preserving the history of fan works, fan culture, in a myriad of forms. And essentially, they were my best friends while making this video. They have like a whole WIKI clone that's just fan fiction related. It is like, if you need to go waste a couple hours, if you think this video is even somewhat in depth, there's a Wikipedia article about the Alien Brothers I mentioned earlier. That was the Kirk Spock fan fiction. That's 20 pages long. This script is 6, okay? That's how much information they have preserved, and I love them for that. But they also offered legal help to fan fiction writers, protecting them and their work from greedy corporations. The Organization of Transformative Works started AO3 in 2009 because of a single post on LiveJournal. In 2007, by Astolat, otherwise known as Naomi Novik. A company called FanLib, like many other companies, was trying to commodify fan fiction by exploiting their fans for their labor and work. Novik's post was against this, along many others who felt that these quote-unquote outsiders were trying to profit off the work that they had been providing to fans for free. Novik stated, "The people behind FanLib don't actually care about fan fiction, the fan fiction community, or anything except making money off content created entirely by other people and getting media attention. They don't have a single fan fiction reader on their board or writer, And they don't have a single woman on their board either. They're creating a lawsuit bait site while being bad potential defendants, and they deserve to be chased out, being pelted with rocks. And in 2007, this was a major issue. Most sites were too big and prone to this very same issue. And the other sites were too small and scrappy, making it really hard to grow. Novik had this to say. We are sitting quietly by the fireside, creating piles and piles of content around us. And other people are going to look at that and see an opportunity. And they are going to end up creating the front doors that new fan fiction writers are going to walk through. Unless we stand up and build our own front door, we need a central archive of our own. And I just thought that was fucking, it's like when a character says the name of the movie. Have you ever seen the clip from The Evil Within 2?
It's fucking evil out there.
That may be, but there's evil within, too.
But out of this, we got AO3, the biggest fanfiction site ever. Just a few days after Novik's post, LiveJournal, without warning, suspended more than 500 accounts that had mentioned sexually explicit content, many of which didn't post anything explicit or anything that was against terms of service, and LiveJournal either didn't tell them why it was taken down, or they gave them a really bad explanation on why it was taken down. At this point, fans were really concerned about sustaining a genuine fandom of fan fiction if their works could be taken down without warning or without reason. Fanfiction.net even suffered from the same issue, and many other sites didn't allow adult content. Novik originally didn't want to create the archive herself. She was too busy, but dozens of people stepped forward in order to help her with it, and that changed her mind. She knew to make it a non-profit so it couldn't be sold and bought whenever the founders wanted to move on. Francis Coppa, one of AO3's original founders, had this to say, quote, "It turns out fans are everything. Fans are journalists, fans are librarians, fans are graphic designers, fans are lawyers, fans are accountants. Fangirls do absolutely every job there is." AO3's early rise was parallel with that of social media, especially Facebook, and more importantly, Tumblr. Both of these sites, AO3 and Tumblr, had significant impact on fandom growth. Both highlighted the importance of transformative fandom spaces. Also important because the shame people felt producing fan works was beginning to fade, as they could see that, in fact, hundreds of thousands of people just like them existed creating fan works that they loved, about works they loved. With AO3 and Tumblr, fans were talking way more about fan fiction and writing fan fiction, meaning that we were more open about fan fiction and fans' work than any other point in cultural history. Meaning, it was beginning to become normalized. AO3, which came out in 2009, was a couple years before 50 Shades of Grey. But with 50 Shades of Grey is when fan fiction would experience its biggest growth spurt ever in readers and writers, and open fan fiction to the mainstream. AO3 and Tumblr are now synonymous with fan culture, fandoms in general, as well as queer fan fiction and anything in that online space. They were even some of the earliest people to make online spaces for them. So shout out AO3 and Tumblr, as if I couldn't fucking love you guys anymore. Wattpad. Wattpad is also an extremely popular option for fanfiction. It's the third largest category on the site, right underneath romance, teen fiction, fan fiction. What makes it a little different is AO3 more so focuses on the characters within the fanfiction and the universe that were already there, whereas Wattpad has a lot more of self-insert fanfiction. So let's say I wanted to be in the world of Lord of the Rings, I could write myself into that. I'm one of the hobbits, but I'm also magic as fuck, boy. Wattpad also has a reputation for reader insert romance fics written and targeted to teens. For all of this to have grown out of a bunch of slash fangirls wanting a place to read their queer fanfiction is remarkable, especially given that those women planned, designed, and hand-coded the sites up from the ground. A massive project undertaken during an era where women were still fighting to be taken seriously as designers and coders. Also astonishing is that it remains supported fully by fans who have kept the archive fully funded and the servers running purely through donations from the past decade. What's perhaps even more remarkable than all of this, given the legacy and cultural shame around fanfiction that the archive was formed in part to resist, is that AO3 has helped rehabilitate how fanfiction is perceived by the mainstream. In 2013, Time magazine named the archive one of the best sites on the web. AO3 has arguably boosted the average internet user's understanding of fanfiction, and crucially, this familiarity has come from a positive outgrowth of fandom community, rather than a corporatized promotion of it. Fanfiction is a way of the culture repairing the damage done in a system where contemporary myths are owned by corporations instead of owned by the folks. That was said by Henry Jenkins, the director of media studies at MIT in 1997. That's before fanfiction.net was around, mind you. Now, if you somehow made it through this, God forbid, 30-minute video about fanfiction and not learned something about fanfiction, or about how goddamn important fanfiction is and will always be and has always been to the culture, I'm not sure what to say to you. Fanfiction is not only home to the longest written work ever made, with the Loud Hout revamped at a staggering 21,611,009 words. That is nearly 28 times the length of the Bible. And I'm gonna say right now, there is some stuff around this with people saying chapters are entirely copied from other works and pasted from other sources, but fuck, people are willing to put this much work into it, and to put it also right after that, if you don't include that, the next one down is a Super Smash Bros. Fanfiction that has nearly 10 million words. And that one's all OG. All purely written. I haven't seen any shit about that, so that's...
Best part is the Loud House ones are already getting a sequel.
Yeah, I heard about that.
It's insane.
Fanfiction even got to a point where a lot of fanon started to be considered the main canon. Hell, there was even an official Star Wars Writers Guild. George Lucas allowed fans to write books, fanfiction, and they were included as part of the official canon. You know, there were a couple rules so that way you can't be like, actually Yoda died 40 years ago. Couldn't do that. But there were rules, but then you could write your own canon into the universe of Star Wars.
Hey yo, cameraman Ace here. I just want to include the fact that certain franchises like FNAF and Sonic have not only brought on fan writers who have done prominent fan works, but certain parts of the fanon have been made canon after the creators have noticed it for long enough. Check out shit like Professor Gerald and his connection to Angel Island, as well as like the entirety of the FNAF timeline, which has been confirmed to have been rewritten several times to either match or go against game theory's theories. It's pretty insane.
Wait, they actively went against game theory?
Yeah, no.
For shits and giggles?
You know, in an actual interview with Daco, Scott Cawthon confirmed that he's had an antagonistic relationship with MatPat, and that he has changed the canon of FNAF to go against the theories whenever MatPat got too close.
That's really fucking funny.
And even cooler when sometimes he's just right and says, all right, no, that's right. We're just gonna include that now.
And that's about all I have for this video. So get the fuck out there and start writing some goddamn fan fiction. Alrighty, this is a little bonus where I'm gonna talk about a bunch of old works that people consider fan fiction. Actually, I'm dropping the act. Basically, I'm just gonna talk about works that people consider fan fiction and whether or not I would consider them. So like all the shitpost ones, like Dante's Inferno and shit like that, and Plato, which I mentioned at the start of this. The unofficial sequel to Don Quixote, 100%. It is transformative work, and it is a continuation fanfic. If it's named, it's a fanfiction. Dante's Inferno in 1321. Purely from a definition standpoint, it's not a fanfiction. However, I think when you see a lot of people talk about this online, they seem to forget about real person fanfiction. If I can write a self-insert about me fucking Harry Styles, I don't see why Dante can't write a self-insert where he goes through hell and sees everyone that's ever wronged him or done anything bad ever rotting in hell. If you can explain the difference of those to me, I will revoke that I'm calling this a fan fiction. But if you can't, that's a fan fiction. Everything Plato wrote about Socrates after February 15th, 399 BC. As somebody who has read almost everything by Plato, 100% this is all fan fiction, okay? it reads like a fan fiction. Like, genuinely, it reads like a fan fiction. There are a lot of things in that series. I said series like it's fucking, there's continuity between it. It's literally just him writing a fix-it fic, but for a real person who was put to death in Athens. Like, that's fan fiction. That is a fix-it fic, because Athens said he was a bad influence on the youth. They killed Socrates, and he was like, they shouldn't have done that. So he took it into his own hands to write about it. It's the same thing. It's just real person fan fiction, but a continuation and fix-it fic. That's all it is. The Iliad by Homer in 762 BCE. Maybe not the Iliad itself. However, Alexander the Great had fan ships of characters from it. That's real. You can look that up. Greek philosophers had debates over tops and bottoms within the Iliad for who was a top and who was a bottom. So it's not hard to believe that there were written fan works about it. And some even theorize that, how do you actually say that? The Aeneid, written by Virgil, was a fan fiction of the Iliad in 29 BC, depicting the view from the Trojan horse in the Trojan invasion that's in the Iliad. You can even say that's fan fiction, even though technically the Aeneid was paid for by one of the people from the government, basically as a propaganda for their city, and that they were really good. So technically, there's a weird line between whether or not it's fan fiction and whether or not it's propaganda, but I don't really think that matters. I think you can write fan fiction and propaganda into the same thing. That's what 1984 is. Okay, the last one I'm going to cover is the Epic of Gilgamesh, somewhere between 21,000 and 12,000 BCE. This is really going to be up to you guys, but this could very well be fan fiction, because it's then about the oral traditions that were told about the Epics of Gilgamesh, because basically it was stories people would tell to one another, and then people wrote them down the best as they could remember them. And obviously things changed probably a little bit. They put a little writer flair in it. So that could be fan fiction. And that's the same view I have with the Bible too. That could be fan fiction. Even if you believe in Jesus as a real person fan fiction. They have canons of the Bible. My biblical canons. It's a self-insert of God. I don't know if we'll keep that. So he just lore dumped on me on how the Romans thought the Jewish people were writing fan fiction essentially about a God that didn't exist. And then the Romans and Christians went ahead and wrote a fan fiction based on their perceived fan fiction of the Jewish Torah to write their fan fiction of that based that they called the Bible. And even so, there are different versions of the Bible, so much so that they have the term canon put to them. There are canon AUs. There are canon AUs. But 100% the Mormon Bible is a fan fiction. Thank you for watching.